This is going to be a very gushy episode. This is going to be in the same-ish format as when I did the Sonic Colors thing, and it is the same concept. I just finished earlier today Banjo-Kazooie again, and I wanted to go ahead and put my thoughts down on paper. Not on paper, but my thoughts down as organically as I can, and in as organized as a way as I can do in a live format. What is there to say about Banjo-Kazooie? Let's go ahead and go back in time real quick to when this game came out. We had just recently gotten games like Mario 64 that showed us what a 3D platformer could do. If you were playing on, say, the PlayStation, a 3D platformer to you might have been stuff like Crash Bandicoot at the beginning, which largely was a 3D game in a 3D engine, but it was ran with the sensibilities of a 2D game. But you might also have had Spyro, which would have been, closer to the Mario 64 formula. Very open, while still being somewhat level-based. Banjo-Kazooie to me feels like one of the most organic extensions of what Mario 64 gave us when that game came out, with a myriad of improvements over it. While the movement options in this game might not be the same as those in Mario 64, Banjo and Kazooie are nowhere near as athletic as Mario is at the end of the day. But the actual level design for Banjo-Kazooie, it felt a lot tighter. You didn't get booted out of levels the same way you did with the star system. It just felt like an organic upgrade to what we had gotten in Mario 64. Mario 64 is a landmark title, and it is a wonderful game that I have grown to appreciate more and more as time has gone on. But every time that I play Banjo-Kazooie, I am reminded of how much of a stellar game this is. I have a habit of returning to old games in between playing newer games to try to reassess how I feel about them. And I've been doing this since before I had any semblance of a channel, so maybe as I do these reassessments, I'll actually start putting many of these down, putting these thoughts down in video form so that I have this here as sort of a running thing. But I'll revisit some of my favorite games to see if I still feel the same way I do about them. And some old games, I don't feel the same way when I revisit them now as an adult. But Banjo is one of those games that every time I return to it, I love it more and more. There's really only one level in this whole game that I could say that I really don't like, and that's Rusty Bucket Bay. And even then, there's only one area in Rusty Bucket Bay that I don't like, and that's the Boiler Room. But let's go ahead and dial away from all of the smorgasbord stuff real quick and try to get some semblance of organization here. I can go on and on about how much I love this game and how much it means to me, but I think we'll try to go in a couple of sections here. So first, I guess let's go ahead and talk level design. The level you're seeing right here on screen is Click Clock Wood, which is a level that is cut into 4 separate versions of itself based on the 4 seasons that if you've gone outside and touched grass recently, you've probably experienced at least once or twice. Now, the level design in all Banjo levels is roughly the same at its core. There are collectibles hidden around everywhere, and they are largely used to steer you around in the world. You see, during this time in gaming history, most platformers that we understood had really gone the route of point A to point B. Think of the average Mario game. When you are playing an old-school Mario game, you're going from the left-hand side of the level to the right-hand side of the level, and when the level stops, that's when the level is over. Games like Mario 64 and Banjo-Kazooie, however, they took place in open playgrounds that you would be retraversing over and over again. Almost aimlessly, there needed to be some way to guide you through these levels. The way that Mario 64 did it was largely having the type of level you were going into. They gave you a hint as to what you were supposed to do, and would sometimes have coins scattered around to nudge you in certain directions. But you were kind of left to your own devices a lot in 64. Banjo-Kazooie, on the other hand, this is a collectathon in every single way you could possibly define it. Collectibles are hidden everywhere throughout every single level, and they serve multiple purposes. Not only are collectibles required for traversal, things like the gold and red feathers are used for flying and invincibility respectively, ammunition, the blue eggs are used for ammunition for yourself, and also progression through the levels and worlds themselves. You need to collect notes to open doors in Gruntilda's castle, and you need to collect jigsaws to open worlds to get more notes and jigsaws to go forward, and it's a never-ending loop until you've collected everything. Because there are so many different types of collectibles, it's very easy for the game to strew them through the level as breadcrumbs to guide you to where you need to go. The ultimate thing you're looking for are jigsaw pieces. They are the thing that will open up new levels for you, which you will learn new moves in and be able to gather more things you need for later levels. The eggs, feathers, and notes that you find in each level pretty much have one major purpose aside from being the unilateral answer to all of your problems. Everything in this game is collecting. But they are guideposts. They move you from point A to point B without you getting lost. Playing through a level of Banjo-Kazooie when there's no collectibles in it and no enemies around, it feels really, really strange and almost ghost-like. Having these breadcrumbs there, however, a bit different. Now, this was first and foremost a way to make sure that you knew how to get through a level, you knew where you wanted to go, but at the same time, it also gives you a bit of catharsis. There is a jingle that plays every time you grab any single item in Banjo-Kazooie, and there's certainly a bit of a serotonin drip that comes as you grab them. These things are addictive to grab and collect, and every time that I'm playing Banjo-Kazooie, it's like I'm playing for the first time again, and the kleptomania hits in. It's very hard for me to play this game and not try to 100% it now. The first time that I 100% it was about 5 years ago, and ever since then, I can't revisit this game without trying to do it again. It feels almost wrong to not collect every single thing in every nook and cranny when I am playing the game. So, the levels themselves are a smorgasbord. You begin with Mumbo Mountain, which I'm not showing here because I'm just going to be showing off Click Clock Wood for the majority of this, because I didn't record every single level, unfortunately. But you start out in Mumbo Mountain, which is a relatively small level with a little bit of verticality to it, leading on to Treasure Trove Cove, which introduces a lot more underwater swimming mechanics. That's more of a focal point in that level, and there's a little harder platforming there, but the punishment for falling off of a platform is going into the water, leading you into other harder levels like Clanker's Cavern, which is all water, where you have to really play with the amount of air you have available. Going into Bubble Gloop Swamp, where the entire area is a game of the floor is lava, and there's tiny islands that you can actually stand on, and there's only so many places in that level that are safe to exist in. And the levels get harder and harder from there. Leading up to my favorite level of the entire game, the one that I am showcasing here, Click Clock Wood. Now, this is footage from when I did my playthrough here. I'm not trying to play through the game as I'm speaking. That would be silly of me to do. I would get very distracted very easily. But throughout Banjo-Kazooie, you will be unlocking these levels with your jigsaw pieces, and the amount of jigsaw pieces you need to unlock more levels, it gets higher and higher with every level that you go. So Mumbo's Mountain only takes 1 jigsaw piece, but Treasure Trove Cove might take 2. Clanker's Cavern takes about 3 or 4. By the time you get to Click Clock Wood, you're having to dump almost 18 jigsaw pieces onto this, and each level only contains 10. So you've got to get a lot of jigsaw pieces. In fact, actually, to beat the game, you need to have collected 94 of the 100 jigsaw pieces, period. Now, in another platformer game of the same era, like Rayman Legends, this was kind of a cumbersome thing for me. Being told that I needed to collect almost, or even 100% of a collectible to get further in the game, that was ludicrous. Something like Mario 64 didn't put that same kind of limitation on me. I could beat that game with 70 stars instead of the 120 the game had in its cartridge. But for some reason, with something like Banjo-Kazooie, even having the 94 jigsaw requirement to complete the game, it feels really easy and breezy to do it. Because levels aren't really that tedious. Again, there's no boot out system. When you collect a Jiggy, you're not knocked out of the level like in Mario 64. You get to keep going. And Jiggies are laid out in such a way that as you're collecting 1, 2, 3, 4, by the time you get your 6th or 7th Jiggy, you're still breadcrumbing your way around on the path, grabbing them all in one single go. Generally, by the time you've grabbed your 10th Jiggy, you've exhausted every collectible in the entire level, unless you've been rationing them in case you run out. So if you got 100 eggs, you might not be collecting the eggs, and so on and so forth. But outside of level design, which is literally just verticality, floor is lava, and breadcrumbs everywhere to guide you through the levels, what's the actual plot of the game? Pretty much, it's very simple. If you've seen The Wizard of Oz and you've seen, and if you've seen Snow White, take those two together, and that is the story. By and large, that is it. In fact, actually, if I go back here, I don't actually have it. That is saddening to me. I thought I actually had everything up still, but I don't, because I am what you would call very prepared to do a video like this. Let me pull it up here. If I can. This should be it, right? Yeah. If it's not going to be frozen on it. Oh no, this is the one where it was frozen on it. Aha! Yes! I accidentally... So this is a giant piece. I accidentally started recording and stayed recording for 18 hours here and wondered why my computer was overheating by the time I got back. That was a big oopsie. But, so the actual plot of Banjo-Kazooie is very straightforward. Your sister gets captured by a witch who wants to make sure that she is more beautiful than anybody else in the land, so she's going to suck all the beauty out of your sister. She's modeled after the Wicked Witch of the West, even has her laugh, but the plot is, again, very much Snow White, except your sister's very much awake. She's just stuck in a machine that's going to suck all the beauty out of her and basically turn Gruntilda into a thought. But none of that ultimately really matters here. You're not playing the game for the plot. The plot is just there as a driving factor to move you through the levels. And I've already gushed about the level design itself, the way in which collectibles are strewn about to guide you through everywhere so that you don't ever feel lost in these places. Something that by the time you get to, say, Banjo-Tooie, there's fewer collectibles in that game, and they do a much worse job of breadcrumbing you around, and yet the levels are larger. But I'll get to Banjo-Tooie whenever I actually go through and play that game again. So we've gone into the level design, we've gone into the plot. How's the moveset in this game? Banjo and Kazooie, they feel, what's the best way to put it? Fluidly stiff. So if Mario was a fluid acrobat and you could basically get him to twist and contort in every way you wanted to, Banjo and Kazooie are rock solid instead. There's not a whole lot of contorting them around. When you jump, that's it. There's no real finesse or finagling you get to do with that jump. But it doesn't matter, because the level of control that is available for you once you actually get into the air is great. It's hard to explain, but in some platformers, when you jump, the momentum of your jump carries you forward, and that's that. But in Banjo-Kazooie, your momentum in midair means almost nothing, and I mean this in the best way. If you jump forward at full momentum, you can pull back on your control stick, and you can guide yourself back to the exact same area that you jumped away from. You have a very, very solid control of your character in this game, and it's almost shocking that this was accomplished back on the Nintendo 64, and this is a game that still looks really good despite its age. I don't know what it is that Rare was able to pull off back then, but a lot of Rare games, when they aren't GoldenEye, they've actually aged fairly well in terms of their graphical capabilities. I would like to see a Banjo-Kazooie remake at some point, but graphically, the game is a treat, and the levels that you go through are incredibly varied, and the enemies you fight in each level are unique to that level itself. When you're going through Mumbo Mountain, there are trolls that you are having to deal with, and there are ants and termites that you're having to contend with, and those are the enemies there. But as you see here in Treasure Trove Cove, the enemies are clams, and they're They're crabs. They're walking sideways at you that you have to flip on their shells to get to their underbellies. By the time you get to stuff like Click Clock Wood, there's a smorgasbord of enemies that are largely reskins of enemies you've dealt with in other areas, but it's a final level. The point is to revisit those older enemies and see if you still know how to deal with them. So when you're going into a place like Freezeezy Peak, which is the ice level of the game, you're dealing with snowmen that can only be attacked using aerial maneuvers. You're dealing with ice cubes that every single time you hit them, they shatter into smaller and smaller pieces. This is something that just feels right about this game. Enemies do not lack purpose. If I go into a haunted mansion, I'm going to find skeletons, ghosts, and bats, and they're not just aesthetic changes. The way in which you have to tackle these enemies is always different. If you saw the battle I had with the clam over there, if the clam hits you, he steals your items. He's the only enemy in the game that has that mechanic. When you fight the ghosts in Mad Monster Mansion, you can't kill them. If any enemy you fight is considered dead, you can't kill them with standard attacks because they're already dead. Whether it's mummies in Gobi's Valley or these zombies and skeletons and ghosts of Mad Monster Mansion, you need to use invincibility feathers to basically delete them out of existence. It's the only real way to kill them. And it makes every level's enemies feel nice and fresh. About the only criticism I might have is that, well, there's a black screen there that shouldn't be there. I don't know why that's there. But about the only criticism I might have is that the troll enemy archetype that you deal with in Mumbo's Mountain is reused in places like Rusty Bucket Bay. But that's, again, still forgivable. They are roughly humanoid types for those games, and there are still unique enemies in Rusty Bucket Bay to deal with, like explosive TNT crates with eyes that commit suicide to try to kill you, which is interesting. But they are still unique to that level and that level alone. Now that I've gone into the level design, the way the game is put together, and everything else, I guess those are all things that you can largely get from an edited review of this game, and you can get them better from an edited review of this game. So why would I talk about this game in a live format? Well, that's because I kind of want there to be a more personal touch here. So what's that personal touch? I want to talk about my experience. What this game was to me as a kid. When I played Mario 64 for the first time, I got motion sickness. It was the first 3D game I ever touched, and I actually ended up vomiting as a 6-year-old after playing the game for the very first time. Remember, it was Whomp's Fortress that caused me to completely lose my lunch. Eventually it was a thing I adjusted to, but by the time I had adjusted to 3D gaming, I got a hold of Banjo-Kazooie. And this was a game that, as a kid, took me years to complete. Also, AM20, I cannot pronounce the rest of that. Thank you very much for the follow. But Banjo-Kazooie was a game that took me years to complete as a kid, because it demanded a lot from you. It demanded, if you wanted to complete it, you needed to get 94% of all the collectibles in the game in order to actually access the final areas. That's a lot to ask of a kid, even a kid with a strategy guide. But I still went in and played the game over and over again. And I would constantly just go through and revisit levels like Click Clock Wood and stuff just to see if I could find a few more notes than I did last time, or see if I could find a couple of pieces a couple of jigsaw pieces where the puzzles eluded me and I was having trouble. Again, kids and motor skills, sometimes you have them, sometimes you don't. I did not. But this was a comfortable game. It was a game that I could always pop in and just kind of exist in its world. Because there's one more thing that Banjo's world is, more so than anything, it is tangible. It feels very, very real, despite the fact that it's obviously very cartoony. But if you look at the worlds in Mario 64, the worlds in that game are very abstract. Mario worlds are very out there. Banjo's worlds are made up of things that we see in today, like just random normal shit. Like, look at this level's Clanker's Cavern. It's basically a sewer system, and it's all very standard, tangible things you could find in reality. You can see yourself existing here, whereas there are some levels in other games even around this time that are a little more fantastical. Banjo-Kazooie, despite being a game about a bear and bird, has very grounded aesthetics, and it makes these worlds feel real and breathing and living and like a place that I could step into right now and exist into. And it plays with these realistic things in a way that, as a kid, were really, really mystifying. When you're a kid, you're a little more apt to accept those abstract shapes, but any game that can give you something that feels like it could be home, that's something magical. I only ever completed Mario 64 once when I was growing up. I've completed it more times as an adult, but Banjo-Kazooie was a game that I went back to over and over again. I was able to successfully complete it a handful of times by the time I beat it the first time and got a grip on where everything was. This is one of those games that, if you had a Nintendo 64, you probably had Banjo-Kazooie at some point. I can't think of a platformer on that system that is better. I know that there are people who are gonna sing the praises of games like Conker's Bad Fur Day and Mario 64, and even the sequel to this game, Banjo-Kazooie, or Banjo-Tooie. But for me, I can't really think of any of those games that top what this game does. The levels of this game are far more realized and polished than anything in 64 to me. The music of every level is completely unique to itself and incredibly memorable in that. Not that the soundtracks of other N64 classics aren't also memorable, but about the only thing in this game that I would consider weak would be its story, and it's not a game that you're playing for its story, so that's not even really a weakness there. And strangely enough, this is also a game that I think has stood the test of time. If you have not picked up a copy of Banjo-Kazooie on like the Xbox Live Arcade at all in the last 10, 20 years, because it's an older game and you're playing newer platformers like, say, Hat in Time and stuff like that, I behoove you, please, go pick up Banjo-Kazooie again and tell me just how the game feels to play. There are 2 platforming games in my life that I have played in my time on this green earth that I would argue have unparalleled platforming experiences. And those are Mario Sunshine and Banjo-Kazooie. Banjo-Kazooie in the robustness of its movement, in the tangibility of its worlds, in the breadcrumbing and genius way that it guides you through its levels, making you just that much more incentivized to go through every nook and cranny of every level and 100% explore everything, because there's always something to find. And then Mario Sunshine, because I've never played a game that feels as tight to control as that one. But we'll get to Sunshine when we get to Sunshine. I've gushed about this game's controls, I've gushed about this game's level design, I've gushed about the fact that it was one of the first games that I played as a kid, and there's gonna be a level of nostalgia there when I'm talking about this, and there's no real way to avoid that. But I also think that it's okay for there to be that nostalgia there. At the very least, I'm honest with that. But I also feel that objectively, if you pick this game up today, it still holds its weight now. I guess there is one other complaint I could give, but it's largely a complaint that most games on the N64 shared, and that's the camera control. Now, there's nothing wrong with the camera control in Banjo-Kazooie, let's make it 100% clear. But there are 2 things that you will find that this game asks of you that I think need to be addressed. One of them is there are several platforming challenges in the game where the path ahead of you will be laid out in almost a diagonal way. And something about the controls in Banjo-Kazooie do not lend themselves to walking in diagonals perfectly. In fact, actually, you just saw me fall off of Clanker's tail there, because the platforming challenge there was just walking diagonally up his tail. There's platforming challenges like that in Bubble Gloop Swamp and Click Clock Wood, where you're either timed or you're having to run up and down a singular area and hope you don't die, because if you fall, you'll fall likely to your death. These almost like diagonal platforming challenges are littered all through this game. And it's a very simple mechanical thing, but for some reason, it is hard to do those diagonal movements when playing this game, and it's always been an issue for me. And I don't know why it always has been. Maybe that's a personal thing, but that is what it is for me. The camera issues largely don't help with this. You do have the ability to move the camera behind yourself, which can mitigate a great majority of the diagonal walking issues. But there is one issue that is not ever present, but when it rears its ugly head, it rears it very hard. And that is the fact that sometimes the camera can get locked up on objects. Once you get to the GameCube era of platformers, a habit started to be developed for game developers where if you happen to put a physical object in front of the camera would unload the object from existence, so you could just see through it. You could see your character no matter what you would do. The N64 and other early consoles didn't adapt this same approach. Instead, the camera acted as more a physical thing that needed to maneuver itself around the environment. So, you might not have been able to see it earlier, but there were points where the camera would hang itself up on Clanker's fin. There's an area that is really, really bad at it that if I had the wherewithal and knew the actual timestamp, I would pull up. In Click Clock Wood, where there's a treehouse that's being built in every version of the level, and when you get to the under area of the treehouse, which is where the platforms leading to the rest of the level happen to be, the camera always gets hung up on the treehouse. And maybe it sticks out to me so much because it is so rare that the camera hang up is actually an issue. But when it's there in one of the worst possible ways, period. But these are still really minor nitpicks. The game runs perfectly fine despite those issues, and even with those issues, it's hard to argue that other games of the time didn't have those. But I would still compare Banjo-Kazooie with those issues that are very much of its time. I would still compare it to games of today in terms of quality. I can't think of a platformer that's released in the last 10 years that Banjo-Kazooie can't, at the very least, hold a candle to. And it might not look like the most exciting game to play when you're watching it being played, but let me assure you, if you pick up a copy of Banjo-Kazooie right now, and you start playing through that game, that kleptomania is going to sink in. You're going to end up grabbing just about every collectible in Mumbo's Mountain, and as soon as it's exhausted, you're going to want more. You're going to move to Treasure Trove Cove and try to do the same thing. It's going to be a lot harder. It's going to be a shark trying to kill you. But you're going to find yourself doing it in every level. You're going to find collectibles not just like rupees in Legend of Zelda, where you grab them all and everything's happy once you've grabbed them. These are going to be a constant thing. Remember, in Banjo-Kazooie, collectibles aren't just a means to an end. They are the game. Even in Mario 64, collecting was a means to an end. Collecting was how they created a point A and point B, with the point A being the beginning of the level and the point B being wherever the star happened to be. Banjo-Kazooie doesn't work that way. There is no point B. There's only a giant open sandbox for you to play around in and grab all the goodies in, every single time. And it might not sound engaging to just collect a bunch of stuff in a level like it's a scavenger hunt, but it is. And there are so many ways to play this game right now, whether you pick it up via emulation or whether you happen to pick it up on the Xbox Live Arcade. It's easy to get a hold of this game, and it's easy to play it now with whatever control scheme you happen to be most comfortable with. And I highly recommend you do. And if you did, let me know in the comment section below if I convinced you to give this old game a try. If you have already played this game and you have some memories of it you want to show, then hey, comment section's great for that too. I'd love to interact with you and share some old fogey stories about this game. Or if you're not an older gamer and you happen to have picked this game up, despite it not being from whichever generation you happen to belong to, that's a perspective that I'd like to hear too. Because there is always that chance that I am blinded by nostalgia, and somebody might pick up the game now and it might not seem quite as perfect to them. But for me, Banjo-Kazooie's about as perfect a platformer as I could ever ask for. And I guess the last thing I'd say is, Rare, if you're listening, I would really like a Banjo-Kazooie 3. Not nuts and bolts, and please not something that learned all of its lessons from Banjo-Tooie, like the ukulele did. Please give me something that feels more like this. This is polished. This is focused. This is everything I want in a platformer and more. The only thing it isn't is more. But with all that said, if you enjoyed this video, despite it being rambly and mostly just gushing about something that I care about a lot, but you might not, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you haven't already. That would be like really, really awesome. And I guess with all that said, there's only one other thing to say. That's insert into the video tagline here. Thank you guys so much for watching me just ramble about something that I love. Hey, thank you so much for watching this video. It really means a lot to me. If you want access to behind-the-scenes content for the channel, please consider checking out my Patreon. I do weekly vlogs over there where I give real-life updates to what's going on behind the scenes on the channel, stuff that you don't really get over here and even on Twitch. Patreon also helps the channel's stability a whole lot. Without Patreon, I wouldn't be able to do this at all. Especially with the kind of content that I do, neither YouTube nor Twitch are the most stable sources of income. If you are a $20 and up patron, then you will be featured on the ending slides as shown in the beginning of the end credits. If you want to catch the streams where all this content comes from, then consider heading over to Twitch and following. And if you want to continue watching over here on YouTube, maybe consider clicking one of the end screen videos. And once again, I want to thank you so much for spending your time with me over on my channel. I wouldn't be able to do literally anything that I'm doing over here on YouTube without each and every one of you. So, thank you.